welcome back everybody. So after this nice little cup of tea and a tea over tea, I think it's time for continuing where Rajesh left off his thought-provoking session. This time we'd like to invite some of you industry leaders to have your views, to share your thoughts on how you think this entire journey is going to be for some of us banks. So with that, may I invite Mr. Andrew Wilkie for our panel discussion, represents Al United Bank in Bahrain. Mr. Alexander from Vegagen Bank, Ethiopia. I'd like to call upon Rajesh again. Rajesh, for you to be here. And I'd like to call upon Mr. V. Kumar from Siddharth Consulting. Thank you for gracing our invitation today. I'll leave the forum for continuing our discussion from here on. Over to you. As we hear, panelists have engaging discussions and round-robin discussions for the better part. We'd like to keep it a very interactive session. We'd like all of us to be participating. Please feel free to join the discussion. Please let us know. Just walk forward, and we'd like to have you contribute as well to the discussion.
Definitely an interesting panel to have here. So, especially after having a very interesting presentation this morning with Rajesh, giving us a piece of everything that you see there on the screen, I guess it's going to be a very, very interesting conversation. I'm going to keep it, I know the topic was to actually talk more on bots, but I think the relevance, if I may, would actually be far more relevant for and useful for the audience if you were to be talking more on the digital, which is a little more broader, if I should say that, from a conversational standpoint. And I guess we should talk a little more on the part of it is to do with experiences, but I guess with the kind of thought leadership that you bring to the table from your respective long innings in your respective roles, I guess it will be useful to also have some forward-looking perspectives in this conversation. So maybe I'll actually start the conversation with you, Andrew, and I'll probably ask you, if I may, which is more challenging in a digital transformation? Is it more technology, or is it more people?
Interesting question indeed. I guess it depends on the technology, and it depends on the people, because nothing and nobody is the same. You can get easy technology to implement, adopt. You can get easy people to work with. So it really is a combination of both, I feel. The thing is, how do you get them both to work together? You have to look at it as a whole. You can't have technology without people. And nowadays, you can't have people without technology because they're just too far left behind.
And which change is more difficult? Changing people's mindset? Changing technology platforms?
Well, I am an IT person, first and foremost. So I think changing the IT is sometimes easy. It stops answering back after a while. People do change. And sometimes when you have them where you want them, they then change to something else again. And that's what makes it interesting and fun. Definitely IT.
Interesting. No, that I think was important to ask because many times when you go through these large digital transformations, the experiences that people go through are not necessarily all about technology. The challenges are actually to do with making people mindset change. And that brings me to my question to you, Alex. When you talk about people, there are two parts to the people aspect. One is internal and the other is external, which is actually your customers, right? Now, as a bank, and I know you are one of the leading banks in Ethiopia, you obviously have been, driving a lot of change, not only for your bank, but also for the region and your country. So give me a perspective on how do you actually get your customers to embrace what would actually be a digital transformation journey. So it could be, I mean, do you actually spend more energy in evangelizing? Are you more reactive? Are you more proactive? And if you could share some experiences there.
Thank you. Just to give you a very brief highlights on our bank. It's called the Wagagan Bank from Ethiopia, which is located in Eastern Africa. It's been now 6 years since we have been partnering with Infrasoft on the core banking solution together with digital channels, internet banking, mobile banking, and other auxiliaries like anti-money laundering. It's a bank with over now 600,000 customer base, over 160 branches, with 150 ATMs and closer to 300 point of sale terminals, with 125,000 card holders in the e-payment system. It's a population. Ethiopia is a very big country in Africa. It's a population nearly 100 million, only next to Nigeria. Only 20% of the population banked. So the vast majority of the population yet to be banked or is underbanked. Apart from this, 70% of the population is under the age of 30, and much more interesting, 40% of the population again is a digital generation or the millennial. So there is a very wide prospect in thinking of expanding digital banking in a digital world. But as my friend Andrew quotes, I also to agree that changing technology is much simpler than changing the customer or the people, especially in a country like us, Ethiopia, where we have not been open to the global arena, to the digital arena, for different historic reasons. It is to be seen that there is a lot to be done on creating awareness, as I have said, in evangelizing the essence of mounting this digital platform. Of course, it has a very sensible grand value proposition, both for the bank and for the customer. As has been presented by Mr. Rajesh, it's like presenting the banking service to exactly where the people are living. It is bringing the bank very closer to the public. So, though we need to work hard on evangelizing, on increasing the awareness level, apart from that, it is only a matter of when. It's not a matter of whether it is going to be or not going to be. It is definitely we are going to mount into this.
It's a matter of time.
Yes.
That's interesting, right? I mean, with a population, 40% population actually, you're talking about the digital age group. I think it's a very, very large number, and I guess that's going to be applicable for most of the countries from where the participants are here from. I think that's true for, I guess it's a global phenomenon that we are looking at. And that brings me to the question to you, Rajesh. So you actually have seen, you've seen banks, let's put it this way, there are banks that actually have been operating for a very long time, conventionally, and looking to embrace change. And there are banks that actually are relatively younger, who actually have, let's say, who have been born just before the digital age, and actually, therefore, a lot of their processes are actually digitally aligned, if I can use that phrase. What, in your view, has actually made embracing, let's say, the new age of whatever you have displayed out there more effective? And if you had to pick, let's say, critical success factors, what would those be?
So, we've had the privilege of implementing solutions for banks that have been in existence for decades. Very large banks in India. Some of the top 3 banks amongst the top 10, 3 amongst the top 10 banks in India, in the public sector banks, they use our solutions on a hosted model for mobility. And when we've entered the sector, it was always a nervous beginning to say, how much time will we take to implement the solution, because we would anticipate resistance in terms of saying, okay, it's been there for decades, will they change their processes? But I'll tell you the surprising thing was our very first contract that was taken up. I was very clear that we would be able to interface to the core banking solution and provide the mobile app, etc. very quickly. But I wasn't very sure about how the bank would respond. Within about 4 weeks, we were live from the time we signed the contract. 4 weeks from the time of signing the contract, the bank had launched its app. We were an event like this with probably more audience, their customers involved, and the bank then running the app themselves on the big screen. So it was a visual change that you can look at, and this is something which is a change that digital has driven. That the teams within the banks have got far more digital than what you would imagine, whether it is a very old bank or whether it's a new digital bank. I think one of the aspects of when you say critical success factors, an important part I would consider there is involving your customer and clearly understanding what your customer wants as a digital experience. It may not be, sometimes you might over-engineer a digital experience and take so much time to launch it. And I've seen a lot of new banks get into do that mistake, that they would over-engineer to say, I'm going to have the security policy in this way and this, and it takes such a long time, and a year almost, by the time of which the digital technology has moved to the next generation. So I spoke about digital 1.0 and 2.0. 2.0 is something that you would probably see adapted a year from now. 1.0 was the mobile banking, the access to electronic payments and things like that. And the new banks could possibly miss the game of a generation of IT just over-engineering the process. So that is a critical success factor to say, keep the things very simple. Simplicity is very important about how you engineer your processes. The second part is to have the mandate of all the businesses within the bank. So long as the involvement of various stakeholders is there, you would find a collaborative approach to launching a digital channel. Otherwise, for example, you could have a mobile banking channel that is launched by IT as an initiative, and you would have the legal department asking queries about the language of the menus that you put in, about saying where's your disclaimer before you took the transaction digital. You allowed an opening of account on the mobile for a recurring deposit, but did you sign that form? Because have you been at the branch? It's got a two-page contract for signing a deposit. And so it tends to be a collaborative approach that is required as a critical success factor to say we are going digital, what is it that we will change in the bank? So ensuring that business process re-engineering comes in seamlessly. And the third part, which is obviously trying to keep the IT infrastructure very clear in terms of a strategy to say, is it hosted, is it going to be internal, and clearly identifying owners with responsibilities of who's doing what. Because sometimes you would end up going down the digital journey and then saying, oh, guess what, we don't have the connectivity from our core banking to that hosted site. And that would take 3 weeks, so you certainly miss the date of launch. You would have, for example, clear parts missed out on saying, yeah, we've got the app ready and everything is ready to go. But guess what, we forgot to load it on Apple Store, that takes 2 weeks. So the part of the entire IT planning needs to come in to say when a digital offering is being rolled out, you have that plan in place.
Very interesting. Yeah. So you're talking about collaborating with people, you're talking about keeping it simple, talking about getting your processes aligned, and you're talking about getting your IT infrastructure to actually be aligned, right? And that's fascinating. And that brings me back to the conversation that we were having earlier today. And you see, one of the challenges that Rajesh articulated is this collaborative effort that actually is critical to drive a change of this nature. And somewhat we actually are getting into a territory of, let's say, unknown, right? We actually, it is an area that is being explored, that is actually being experimented, that's being, we are collectively moving into a space which, you're all going to experience together. What would you, from your experience, what would be the most effective approach, should I say, to actually bring in this collaboration? Should you actually, a shortest way to actually get this executed?
That's a $1 million question. If I knew that, I probably wouldn't be sat in this room talking to you all. I've spent a long time as a project manager. Sounds great. They even call me a senior project manager now. I'm not sure if that's because of my age or because of my position. Look, we can't say IT and we can't say business. We all belong to one entity. In my case, it's a bank. And our job is keeping our customers happy and to a certain extent in control. Because ultimately, we're in the business of making money. The whole bank. Not just IT going off and dreaming of new ideas and moving forward. There's pointless. Business people have to implement them and use them with their customers. So, how do you get everybody together? The simple answer for me is, I don't believe you can. But you need to be able to look at what are the most important parts and not have one person in sole control. Have a board of people in control on big projects. And on that board needs to be people who ultimately care about the delivery of what is being produced. So, it's a little bit of enforcement. There's a little bit of a checklist. And there's a lot of buy-in to what we're producing belongs to the people who are in charge. Quite often you'll see steering committees. A great misnomer is steering committee. Steering committees only mostly meet whenever there's a problem. It's too late to steer. A steering committee is leading the way forward. Not everybody in the car gets to drive. The man with the wheel gets to drive. No matter who says what does. So, it is collaborative. It is buy-in. It is checklist. It's the only way, and it's definitely not IT. Definitely not. We've moved in our bank over the last year to getting the business more involved, especially in the initial stages. So no more, oh, well, I can't do that because I don't have a new AML solution. Sorry, Rajesh. Or I don't have, whatever it happens to be, B2B. I asked IT about that. Business people need to have buy-in. They need to have a sense of responsibility and not thrust it all back on IT. Likewise, IT people have to listen to business people and understand the business that their solutions are working for. It is imperative, really, for IP people to understand the frustrations, the pressures, and the business of the business. Otherwise, how can you deliver?
Fascinating. No, I guess it's, I think the experience speaks for itself, right? I think it's very, very critical that you get the ownership in the system, and it cannot be obviously built overnight. You've got to do a little bit of enforcing, a little bit of checklisting, and as you rightly said, getting some collaboration there. But I have another question for you, Alex, if I may, and I'm taking from where Andrew left this. You see, one of the issues that you have there are two types of technology transformations. One which is not necessarily impacting the customers directly, such as, let's say, a core banking change is impacting your users and subsequently the customers. But if you was to talk to any of these applications you're talking about here, be it an internet or a mobile, where the user actually is the customer, right? Where you actually are getting an experience that the customer is going to be, directly impacted, and you actually as an IT function, and if I may, at this point of time, make that reference, you obviously are one hop or a skip away from the interface with the customer because you aren't in the front line. How do you deal with getting to know what the customer needs, and if the customer is satisfied, and how do you gauge that process? And if you could share some experience there.
Thank you. Just before reflecting on this question, I would like to add simplicity on presenting this service and product in a very simple way to our customers, not from the internal perspective, which Mr. Rajesh has well addressed, but from the external perspective, which will be subjecting the regulatory organs of the nations. As you all know, there are many African brothers in the world. This platform is really an idea for Africa, for emerging economies in general, particularly for Africa. The central banks, most of the central banks in Africa, which I believe will play a very vital role in presenting this product and service to the public. By the same logic of to incubate, first to innovate, then to incubate, then to regulate. This has to be the right one as far as central banks or regulatory organs are concerned. But most of our African experience, regulation is the most sounding role that these regulatory organs play. So I can see that this will limit the quick adoption rate of this product and service. So it's not only in the internal of the banks that simplicity has to be considered, but a kind of technology provider and vendor like Infrasoft should also look into the regulatory bodies of the nations, should look into how you can influence the regulatory organs so that they will create a very favorable environment for the banks to make these things realized in a very simple way. So coming to your question, yes, you have said it right. When we step into the digital services, the customer is not going to directly be faced. He's not going to come to the branches. So we need to have a very thoughtful channel that we can get his feelings, that we will have to make sure that he is getting served well. So I think still the same delivery channel, which is the mobiles, are going to be the very helpful instruments. We have to create a very interactive platform on his mobile, which is everybody's apparatus at this point in time. So we need to send queries on how he feels, on how he experiences on the service, and in such a way we can know how he feels, and we can think of what additional more services we can avail in the platform.
Okay. So there is obviously a process of learning that you have to go through in with the customers. Interesting. And I'll, maybe the last question, and then we'll take questions from the audience, Rajesh. See, and this is a little bit of a googly, if I can use a cricket parlance here. You've seen implementations that have gone very well, and you've seen implementations that have not gone so well, right? If you have to pick one or two very distinct factors that are contrasted in these two situations, from an implementation standpoint, and most of the people in the audience here have either embarked on a journey of transformation or planning to do one, and I think this insight will be very, very useful, right? So what makes or breaks a successful transformation execution from your experience?
Yeah, it is. Indeed is a googly, because I think it sometimes it's the secret to success of how we implement well, and sometimes it's also the challenges that come forth. I think the important part when we look at implementation of a digital strategy is, in fact, I would say the mandate, like I said earlier, of all the stakeholders. And then one of the areas where we've seen successes, so let me tell out successes, how it works as well. Where the bank says that they will go for a pilot launch with a closed user group and take active feedback before doing a full-fledged launch, it has worked very well. So if you had mobile banking, make sure you give it to about 500 customers, maybe most of them 300 employees, 200 customers, and then work out the feedback to say what more do you want in that. Sometimes having a too complicated product itself, which could be a sort of loss. And I'll tell you something that is different in digital than what is there. You'll find one thing in digital, that there is no user manual. How many of you would think there is a mobile banking software that comes with a user manual? Not anymore. Because guess what? WhatsApp didn't have a user manual. Facebook didn't have a user manual. So the fact is, this generation that is using mobility does not know how to read user manuals. And in fact, I can tell you for the programmers that they also don't know how to write user manuals.
You need a Kindle to read the user manual.
Exactly. So that is one important part. A success factor is to define the simplicity, prioritize your customers' needs, and have that. There are various important aspects when you design the whole mobile strategy for the bank, is to also look at the awareness within the customer. And I can tell you that if the customer isn't aware of, one, the good things, but also the bad things, you would find that strategy failing. Like for example, a bank could go in for saying that we want to have a memorable password in the mobile banking as our security feature. And so we will allow you to register on the mobile and go in and get the registration done. It seems very easy to do, and it meets the first criteria of not having a user manual, because it is a intuitive user interface. Go and register. But when you go to register and then you find that customer calls and says, I never registered for mobile banking, but I'm having transactions from a mobile banking app. And you realize that there could be fraudsters out there that call up the customer and say, I'm speaking from the bank, and would you like to register for the mobile banking? Now, what is the password that I can fix for you so that you don't have to go through the pains of getting through this? And so he gets them through the navigation of the mobile app and says, now you are free to download this on your mobile and carry on mobile banking. In the next 5 minutes, he's got enough information from the client to conduct fraudulent transactions. And by the time the actual client downloads the mobile app, a fraud would have taken place. Something like this will make sure that he would delete it and never use mobile banking ever. The first thing he's going to do is call up the call center and say, disable my mobile banking, and ensure that he tells his friends and family that mobile banking means fraud. And this is something similar that happens to any person having a credit card. You can find that in the generation that didn't use credit cards or the generation that uses it, it is all the fact about saying who has been very careful to use it and who has got the education. So I think the critical success factor is making sure that the customer is aware how to manage it. And the last one is, of course, about having clarity on how much of data you have when you give that out on the digital. One of the critical success factors is that the fact that if you want to provide a service, make sure that your backend is ready for provision of that service. You cannot have a mobile front end and have a service rendered which will take the same time as it took earlier. So if you put up a checkbook request on the mobile, don't put it in a database that somebody is going to manually pick up and then issue the check. If there was a stop check request, make sure it is straight through processed into the core banking and not coming into a queue, because guess what, the customer has put a stop check because there's the issuance and probably it's going to land up at the branch. So these are, I think, some of the things, pretty much looking at the same standard operating procedures of a bank and making sure you remove the elements that hinder the straight through processing of information.
STP.
I have not mentioned in this whole thing so far, I have not mentioned security, I have not mentioned other factors. And the reason for that is I've never found a mobile banking project or a digital project stopping because of security. It is, I can tell you that this is really a non-issue. And I have spoken at events and somebody said, oh, what are you doing about security? If the bank person put up the mic and said, oh, we are the most secure bank, believe me, he'll get hacked tomorrow. Right? So security is something that is nice to have. It is something that people have to implement meaningfully across the bank, but ensure that you don't speak a lot about it and keep the process simple. Because if the security is complex, guess what? Nobody is going to configure it. If it is simple to use, malware passwords, challenge response, your customer knows it, and the security is only useful if your customer knows how to be secure. If you make it so complex that the customer does not understand how to keep himself secure, you have defeated the purpose.
Weakest link is where you actually are vulnerable. Excellent. No, I think that was a very interesting conversation, and I think between the three of you, I think there's a lot of insights that we picked. I would like to actually, maybe the mic can be shared to the audience, and if there are questions from the audience, it will be good to take them now. Yeah. So maybe I'll ask a question to the audience. How many of you are right now in the middle of a digital banking transformation? If you can lift your hands. I can't believe nobody is in a transformation stage right now. I said, how many of you are in the process of either commencing or in the middle of a digital transformation?
Okay, I guess I'll be the first. I'll ask for the second question. That one comes much faster. So my name is Russell Ako from Nairobi, Kenya. I work with the Cooperative Bank of Kenya. I head the ICT Strategy and Innovations. Now my question could be a bit off, but I hope it will be within the kind of discussions we are having here. It's all good to discuss digital solutions, and especially within the banks. Now, from the market I come from, one of the key risks that the banks see or dangers they see to their business is the challenge posed by the telcos. The need to do financial inclusion has really been grasped by the telcos, so much so that they're really getting into the space where the banks are playing. Now, I have the distinct advantage that I've also worked for a telco before I joined the bank. And one of the things that the telcos are scared of are the over-the-top players like WhatsApp and Facebook who will come and take over their space. So as banks, we are scared of a monster who is in turn scared of another monster. So this question is particularly to you, Rajesh, and maybe the gentleman on my right. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names. In your expertise and experience, what's the prognosis to us banks insofar as telcos are concerned? How many years do we have? Do we look at such a conference, the fifth one from now, having telcos here instead of banks? Or is it a concern that is not really necessary insofar as banks and telcos are concerned?
Fascinating question. I know this session is between you and the lunch, and it's what coincidentally the gentleman has asked about the digital food chain and who's actually on top of the food chain eventually, right? So prey and the predator. So maybe Rajesh, you want to go for that?
I'll take that first, and Andrew can then delve into the business details. I'll just explain this, and I come from at least seeing the movement in India, where we've had the advent of new generation of banks, like payment banks, then another generation of banks that was the small finance banks, and increasingly, and at the telcos as well. So the payment banks, a couple of telcos got the license to operate as banks. And increasingly, the feeling was that, this is the so-called time to write obituary for banks. So the famous statement from Bill Gates to say that banks will be there, banking will be there, but we don't know about banks, was all spoken about in various events. But how I see it is that, we've got to understand the classic strengths of what a bank has got. You have the client information. And let us understand what telcos are able to offer today is the extension of a transaction using the power of communication. And to say that it will enable a mobile wallet and enable a transaction to be done at that point in time. Is that all what a client wants? I don't think so. Because what a client wants is one, the level of trust that he has with the bank. Can he park all his money with the telco? I can tell you something that in terms of loyalty factors, the moment there is a zero cost on on SMS and free data, the client would love to switch over to that next telco, right? And it doesn't work like that with the bank. So I think the loyalty factor is something that you can really hold on to, and then adopt digital in such a way that you're able to challenge what seamless data or payment information was being given by that telco.